Hello and welcome to Casey Reacts, and I am continuing to react to the Wealth of Nations. This is part of our kind of a literary review kind of series of podcasts for this channel, and this was inspired because of all of from all of the discussion of what we in late stage or end stage capitalism and stuff like that. What does that even mean? And it occurred to me that I've never actually read The Wealth of Nations. A lot of people that I knew quoted The Wealth of Nations, but I don't think they actually read it either. I think they just were quoting what they had heard was in there. And uh, because it was never on any of the required reading lists, and this wasn't something that, we're talking high school back in the early 90s. There wasn't the internet that we have today. And so you didn't have like you weren't able to go out and get like a PDF of the Wealth of Nations from I don't know, the Gutenberg Project or wherever. So um and so I just wanted to kind of visit this and see what the blueprint was actually calling for and see whether we actually have followed this or whether it has suggestions for kind of guardrails that keep things from going too far, or does it actually reflect how we do business today? So I am on my third, this is the third episode on this, and we are covering chapter two of book one of The Wealth of Nations. Of the principle which gives occasion to the division of labor. This division of labor, from which so many advantages are derived, is not originally the effect of any human wisdom, which foresees and intends that general opulence to which it gives occasion. It is the necessary, though very slow and gradual, consequence of a certain propensity in human nature, which has in view no such extensive utility, the propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another. Whether this propensity be one of those original principles in human nature, of which no further account can be given, or whether, as seems more probable, it be the necessary consequence of the faculties of reason and speech, it belongs not to our present subject to inquire. So basically, he's saying this is that they're not looking at this from a kind of from the same viewpoint that I would as an anthropologist, um, which is, where does this arise? He's just saying, no, this is something that we're calling this an assumption. Um, it is common to all men and to be found in no other race of animals, which seem to know neither this nor any other species of contracts. Two greyhounds, in running down the same hare, have sometimes the appearance of acting in some sort of concert. Each turns each turns her towards his companion, or endeavors to intercept her when his companion turns her toward himself. This, however, is not the effect of any contract, but of the accidental concurrence of their passions in the same object at that particular time. Nobody ever saw a dog make a fair and deliberate exchange of one bone for another with another dog. Nobody ever saw one animal, by its gestures and natural cries, signify to another, this is mine, that is yours. I am willing to give this for that. Now, okay, this is not actually right. Of course, we know a lot more than he did back in 1776. We know, for example, primates, other primates, and like bonobos, chimps, gorillas, these have all of the higher primates have been shown to actually do transactions. In fact, I think that pretty much all of the I will say that most of the primates probably are capable of it, just to different degrees. And we know that a major component of this is actually the ability to pre-plan, right? To know that I don't need this, but I will need that. And we have historically said that this is something that divides humans from animals. But yet we know that, for example, heck, if you watch SciShow uh, with Hank Green, there was he had a an episode that came out. I want to say, well, as of when I'm recording this, it came out yesterday on a on spiders that think, that pre-plan, that can, that have that level of cognition. Spiders, arthropods, things that, shouldn't, that we think should not be capable of doing such things. But there's a matter of not does it exist, but do we recognize it? Do we acknowledge it? Obviously, that knowledge that we have today is far in the future with this book. But this is one of those things where sometimes when you read these older books, they lay down something that was true, was seen as true at the time, but but has since been debunked, or at least, you know, we understand better today. Um, uh, when an animal wants to obtain something either of a man or of another animal, it has no other means of persuasion but to gain the favor of those whose service it requires. A puppy fawns upon its dam, and a spaniel endeavors by 1,000 attractions to engage the attention of its master who is at dinner when it wants to be fed by him. Man sometimes uses the same arts with his brethren, and when he has no other means of engaging them to act according to his inclinations, endeavors by every servile and fawning attention to obtain their goodwill. He has not time, however, to do this upon every occasion. In civilized society, he stands at all times in need of the cooperation and assistance of great multitudes, while his whole life is scarce sufficient to gain the friendship of a few persons. In almost every other race of animals, each individual, when it is grown up to maturity, is entirely independent, and in its natural state has occasion for the assistance of no other living creature. And we know this to be wrong. We know this to be incorrect. Now, another one of those false dichotomies, one of those one of those divisions that doesn't actually exist. There are social animals, and they need each other. They rely upon each other. Sometimes they rely upon each other in ways that are more vital than how people rely on each other, because we're capable of learning, we're capable of growing, we're capable of integrating new knowledge and new skills, and animals aren't necessarily capable of that. So they rely on having specific others to do things for basic survival of the group. Um, so this is so that section, that another false statement there. Um, Not a lie, but just wrong, just factually wrong. Um, but man has almost constant occasion for the help of his brethren, and it is in vain for him to expect it from their benevolence only. He will be more likely to prevail if he can interest their self-love in his favor, and show them that it is for their own advantage to do for him what he requires of them. Whoever offers to another a bargain of any kind proposes to do this: give me that which I want, and you shall have this which you want, is the meaning of every such offer, and it is in this manner that we obtain from one another the far greater part of those good offices which we stand in need of. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Nobody but a beggar chooses to depend chiefly upon the benevolence of his fellow citizens. Even a beggar does not depend upon it entirely. The charity of well-disposed people indeed supplies him with the whole fund of his subsistence. But though this principle ultimately provides him with all the necessaries of life which he has occasion for, it neither does nor can provide him with them as he has occasion for them. The greater part of his occasional wants are supplied in the same manner as those of other people, by treaty, by barter, and by purchase. With the money which one man gives him, he purchases food. The old clothes which another bestows upon him, he exchanges for other clothes which suit him better, or for lodging, or for food, or for money, with which he can buy either food, clothes, or lodging as he has occasion. And this is something that we see quite a bit today with the rise of homelessness, and not, not just the rise of homelessness, but the disenfranchisement the of people. Because when you see somebody standing on the side of the road asking for money, almost certainly that person does it full time. That is a choice that they make. And I know this because I know people who used to do that. And they tell me how how that actually works. It is a matter of motivation. It is a matter of saying that society, there is no reason for me to participate in society, that I see no benefit from participating in the system. That, you know, it's all the social contracts are all a lie and all this stuff. In my view, it is a failure of capitalism that we have people out there doing that, because almost certainly most of them are capable of doing something else. I mean, yes, there are mental health issues, there are addiction issues. A lot of times, those addiction issues and those mental health issues are intertwined with their situation, because at some point, maybe it's chronic depression, maybe that kicked them, maybe that drove them to do what they do, which is treatable. These things are treatable, but it has to be something where they want to have that help, or they won't be helped. You can't force somebody to be well. Um, and in order to do that, you had to give them a reason. They had to see an opportunity to benefit from participating in the system. And and that's something that we really fall short on. I mean, why try if you know you're never going to succeed? Just drop out, you know? And that is where our system fails big time. Um, you know, and they generally don't start out with drugs and stuff, but it gets that way. It gets that way because it's a coping mechanism. Sometimes they are addicted when they first hit the streets, and that too is usually a matter of self-medicating for a problem that is there. That's how they deal with something isn't right, the chemical imbalance in the brain, something like that. And they self-medicate with psychoactive things that they can get from the street, because it is easier to do that than it is to access actual medication and actual therapy. How many psychiatrists are there? Not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. And they're the ones who can prescribe medication to help people. And it's and so when I see that, I don't see somebody who has I see an indictment of our system, of our culture. Anyway, as it is by treaty, by barter, and by purchase, that we obtain from one another the greater part of those mutual good offices which we stand in need of, so it is the same trucking disposition which originally gives occasion to the division of labor. In a tribe of hunters or shepherds, a particular person makes bows and arrows, for example, with more readiness and dexterity than any other. He frequently exchanges them for cattle or for venison with his companions, and he finds at last that he can, in this manner, get more cattle and venison than if he himself went to the field to catch them. From a regard to his own interests, therefore, the making of bows and arrows grows to be his chief business, and he becomes a sort of armorer. Another excels in the making of frames and covers for other little huts or movable houses. He is accustomed to be of use in this way to his neighbors, who reward him in the same manner with cattle and with venison, till at last he finds it in his interest to dedicate himself entirely to this employment, and to become a sort of house carpenter. In the same manner, a third becomes a smith or a brazier, a fourth a tanner or dresser of hides or skins, the principal part of the clothing of savages. There's that S word again, savages. Yeah, he uses it a lot. Yeah, I've said what I said. I've said what I'm going to say about it in previous episodes. You can go look at them. And thus the certainty of being able to exchange all that surplus part of the produce of his own labor, which is over and above his own consumption, for such parts of the produce of other men's labor as he may have occasion for, encourages every man to apply himself to a particular occupation, and to cultivate and bring to perfection whatever talent or genius he may possess for that particular species of business. It's I'm gonna get myself in trouble here. Here's a here's a hot take for you. Marx agrees with Adam Smith. He agrees with Adam Smith on this. Again, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the things that we see as, failures and bad things that happen are a result of the system that we build being bad at what it does, you know, being bad at what, or at least at what it's supposed to do, being bad at enfranchising and uplifting the individual. The difference of natural talents in different men is in reality much less than we are aware of, and the very different genius which appears to distinguish men of different professions, when grown up to maturity, is not upon many occasions so much the cause as the effect of the division of labor. So basically, all of these, the fact that I can do certain things, but I absolutely can't do other things. He is saying he is his thesis is that those are more having to do with habit and practice than by anything inborn. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but on the other hand, we know more things about how we are today than he knew when he was writing. So, I mean, things like dyslexia, things like which I have, I was not going to follow in my dad's footsteps. There are things that I am doing now, things I've done in my life that I could never have done if computers were not a thing. Just because my brain cannot work with numbers, and I do not have an output like most people do. So so I and this is one of those things where it's a matter of large numbers. You can't apply something You can't apply a statistically valid statement to a particular example. So he could very well this very well may be true, but I just can't see it because it doesn't apply to me, because I fall outside of what he would consider normal. Anyway, the difference between the most dissimilar characters between a philosopher and a common street porter, for example, seems to arise not so much from nature as from habit, custom, and education. When they came into the world, and for the first 6 or 8 years of their existence, they were perhaps very much alike, and neither their parents nor playfellows could perceive any remarkable difference. About that age, or soon after, they come to be employed in very different occupations. The difference of talents comes then to be taken notice of, and widens by degrees, till at last the vanity of the philosopher is willing to acknowledge scarce any resemblance. But without the disposition to truck, barter, and exchange, Every man must have procured to himself every necessary inconvenience of life which he wanted. All must have had the same duties to perform and the same work to do, and there could have been no such difference of employment as could alone give occasion to any great difference of talents. As it is this disposition which forms that difference of talents, so remarkable among men of different professions, so it is the same disposition which renders them that difference useful. Many tribes of animals, acknowledged to all be the same species, derive from nature a much more remarkable distinction of genius than what, antecedent to custom and education, appears to take place among men. By nature, a philosopher is not in genius and disposition half so different from a street porter, as a mastiff is from a greyhound, or a greyhound from a spaniel, or this last from a shepherd's dog. Those different tribes of animals, however, though all the same species, are as scarce any use to one another. So what this means is that the difference between the different animal breeds um, isn't useful to them in relating to one another, whereas the differences in humans is useful for one another because we barter, we trade, we truck. And I'll have to look up what he means by truck in this because it's obviously he's using it in a different way than we do today. They didn't have, actually, they did have trucks. I'm trying to think because trucks can also mean the things that like the dollies and things like that, things that move things around. So, so I think that's what he's referring to is this movement of trade, being able to move stuff from point A to point B. Um, where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Ha, there we go. Yes. The strength of the Mastiff is not in the least supported either by the swiftness of the Greyhound, or by the sagacity of the Spaniel, or by the docility of the shepherd's dog. The effects of those different geniuses and talents, for want of the power or disposition to barter and exchange, cannot be brought into a common stock, and do not in the least contribute to the better accommodation and conveniency of the species. Each animal is still obliged to support and defend itself separately and independently, and derives no such advantage from that variety of talents with which nature has distinguished its fellows. Now, that is not necessarily right. And that's not necessarily right because because these differences have nothing to do with dogs, it has everything to do with their relationship with humans. They have their roles because we bred them for specific roles. This was intent by us. We changed them. We made them, we took what they were and made them into what they are for a reason. Now, those reasons don't necessarily exist in the modern world. You know, we don't use dogs the same way. I mean, we talk about things like working dogs and stuff like that, but we don't use them in the same way that they were bred to be used. They just look different, they act different, but we don't use them in the same way generally. So, however, but what that means they um, is that they do have advantage from that variety of talents with which not nature, mankind has distinguished its fellows, because they earn their keep by being themselves, by having these differences of things. Not so much anymore when they're all pets, but but back when they were working dogs, back when they were being developed for specific purposes, those purposes, that was their trade, that was their barter with humanity. So, I mean, on the one hand, from its own limited perspective, this passage is correct. But I gotta say, as an anthropologist, I look at that and I just say, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. You're trying to um, you're you're not applying context properly. Um, we're almost done with this chapter. Among men, on the contrary, the most dissimilar geniuses are of use to one another. The different produces the different produces of their respective talents by the general disposition to truck, barter, and exchange, being brought, as it were, into a common stock, where every man may purchase whatever part of the produce of other men's talents he has occasion for. So, um, but although I say that about dogs, I mean the marketplace is us, right? We're responsible for that. Same thing with cattle. I've heard it's I have heard I've heard people who are Jewish tell me that a bacon cheeseburger should be considered kosher because in a modern industrial food procurement, the milk used to make cheese is never ever going to be mixed with the blood of its mother in food preparation because they come from two completely different lineages. You're not going to use a milk cow to make hamburger. You're not going to milk a, I mean, hamburger. I mean, when you talk about beef cattle, they're mostly males, um, and because of how they build their muscle, build their because of how they develop. And so you're just not going to and this come from a completely different lineage, and you're never going to have the two of them cross. And I am not suggesting that is a valid interpretation of the of Jewish law, because I have nothing to do with that at all. I am just relating what people have said, possibly in jest, but with an eye towards, you know, things are different today than they were, say, 1,000 years ago, especially in our relationship with animals. And this whole matter of these different species having these differences, that these differences are not useful in relation to one another, but they are useful in relation to their relationship with us. And so I don't think that undermines his general thesis. I think what does undermine his general thesis is the is social and eusocial animals, and the specialization to define there. I think but they weren't really looking at. Obviously, they're not looking at insects, ants, bees, that kind of thing, wasps, uh, mole rats. Those kinds of things are not being considered here because he probably wasn't aware of them. So um, um, this is one of those things where if you were back in the day looking at this, reading this back in 1776, 1777, 1778, you're reading this and you're well read, you were educated, you would be like, yeah, that is absolutely the case. That is absolutely true. We read it with our modern eyes, and we start picking it apart. This little bit is wrong. That little bit is wrong. This little bit, they're just inaccurate. But then you have to ask yourself, does that undermine the central thesis of the chapter? And I really don't think it does. I really don't think it does. I think that it was more a matter. I think that it stands on its own. I think that this thing with animals, comparing man to animals, and I understand that because as an anthropologist, that's what you do, right? You compare what you're studying to something to a different situation, to a different context, and you look at the differences between them. It's a comparative thing. And that's what he's trying to do here. The big problem when you're doing a comparative, when you're comparing two different groups like this, is making sure that the two groups are actually analogous. I don't think that they are, but I think that if you strip that out, you're still left with something that still makes sense about how the division of labor originates, which the rest of it is all window dressings, in my view. Now you may think something completely different, and if so, leave leave a comment about that. And this is all I have for you today. That is the end of the chapter. And I know this isn't a 40-minute long thing like the last one, and I'm just going to go straight to uploading it. I'm not even going to try editing it because I want to see how well I'm doing. I've been watching a lot of Lindy Beige, and he does all of his take. Almost everything he does is like one take. Like, here's an hour of rambling on this subject, and people love it. Um, and I'm not saying that I'm even in his class, but I like to see how I do compared to that. Anyway, so you have a like and subscribe if you think that this is something that would be useful to others. If you think it'd be useful to yourself, hit the bell so you're notified of future episodes. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your attention.